In 1966, a desert town discovered oil. In 1978, a fishing village was handed a dream. 60 years later, one built the tallest tower on Earth. The other built the fastest rising economy in history. China manufactured the world. Dubai manufactured a miracle. Both started with almost nothing. Only one of them can be called the better model for the future. And by the end of this film, you will have to decide which is better. This is the story of two cities that dared to build a future from nothing. Welcome back to Echo Mind Documentaries. If this is your first time here, subscribe, like, share, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Let's dive back into the topic. In 1966, a small trading port on the edge of the Persian Gulf discovered oil beneath its sands. In 1978, a fishing village on the southern coast of China was declared an experiment. Neither place had a skyline. Neither place had a reason to matter on a global map. Today, one of them built the tallest building on Earth. The other built the fastest rising economy in human history. This is the story of two nations that looked at empty land and empty desert and asked the same question: what if we built the future here? This is China versus Dubai, two radically different answers to the same challenge. And by the end of this film, you will be able to decide for yourself which answer was better. To understand either of these places, you have to understand what they were before the cranes arrived. Shenzhen, the city that would become the symbol of modern China, was a collection of rice paddies and fishing huts with a population of around 30,000 people, separated from British-controlled Hong Kong by little more than a river and a checkpoint. Dubai, before its transformation, was a modest port town built around pearl diving, a creek economy, and a small population of traders who moved goods between Persia, India, and East Africa. Both had access to water. Both had almost nothing else. What they did have was a leader willing to gamble everything on a single idea, that geography and cheap access to the world could be turned into wealth if the right infrastructure was built fast enough and built before anyone else thought to try. In China, that leader was Deng Xiaoping. After decades of political turmoil, famine, and economic isolation, Deng looked honestly at the failures of central planning and made a decision that would reshape the 21st century. He designated 4 special economic zones, Shenzhen being the most significant, and opened them to foreign investment, private enterprise, and export manufacturing, while the rest of the country remained under strict state control. It was a controlled experiment in capitalism, run inside a communist system, tested in a corner of the country far enough from Beijing that failure would not threaten the whole nation. Factories rose where farmland had been. Migrant workers poured in by the millions, seeking wages that did not exist anywhere else in rural China. Dormitories were built faster than roads. Within a decade, Shenzhen was producing electronics, textiles, and toys for the entire planet. Within 3 decades, it had a skyline that rivaled New York. And it had done it almost entirely through manufacturing, exports, and an enormous, disciplined labor force willing to work at a pace the rest of the world could not match. In Dubai, the leader was Sheikh Rashid bin Said Al Maktoum. Unlike neighboring Abu Dhabi, which sat on vast oil reserves, Dubai's own oil supply was modest and was always going to run dry within a generation. Sheikh Rashid understood this early, and instead of building an economy around extraction, he built one around movement. He dredged the creek to allow larger ships to dock, using a loan he personally guaranteed at a time when many doubted the investment would ever pay off. He built Port Rashid, then later Jebel Ali, which would become one of the largest man-made ports on the planet. He opened Dubai to free trade, minimal taxation, and foreign business ownership decades before it was fashionable anywhere else in the region. When his son, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, took the vision further, Dubai stopped trying to be an oil economy altogether. It became a hub, a place where goods, capital, tourists, and talent could pass through, land, and multiply in value along the way, even if none of it originated there. These two starting points explain almost everything about how each place looks today. China built its future on production. Dubai built its future on connection. Walk through Shenzhen now and you will see a city that manufactures the world's technology. It is home to Huawei, Tencent, and DJI, three companies that between them shape how billions of people communicate, socialize, and capture the world around them. It has one of the busiest container ports on Earth, moving goods to nearly every country with a coastline. Its factories still produce a significant share of global electronics, and its transformation from fishing village to tech metropolis took less than 45 years, a pace of urbanization that has no real precedent in human history. Multiply that story across dozens of Chinese cities, Shanghai, Chongqing, Guangzhou, Wuhan, and you begin to understand the scale of what China accomplished. It did not build one city, it built an entire national infrastructure system, including the largest high-speed rail network on the planet, stretching over 40,000 kilometers and connecting cities that were once days apart by only a few hours of travel. It built subway systems in dozens of cities that did not have a single kilometer of track 20 years ago. It electrified its transport faster than any nation on Earth, and it now produces and exports more electric vehicles than any country in the world, a direct extension of the manufacturing discipline first tested in Shenzhen's original special economic zone.
Dubai took a fundamentally different approach. Rather than manufacturing goods, it manufactured experiences and possibilities. It built the Burj Al Arab, marketed as the world's only 7-star hotel, to announce itself to the world as a place unlike anywhere else. It built the Palm Islands, artificial landmasses shaped from dredged sand, visible from space, to prove that geography itself could be engineered rather than accepted as fixed. It built the Burj Khalifa, at 828 meters, the tallest structure ever constructed by humans, not because the city needed more office space, but because it needed a symbol the entire planet would recognize instantly. It built an entire metro system without a single driver on board any train, a fully automated network moving millions of residents and tourists through a city that less than 60 years earlier had no paved roads at all. Dubai understood something that few cities have grasped so completely, that in a global economy driven by attention, a skyline can be as valuable as a factory, and a photograph can generate as much revenue as a shipment. The economic models diverge sharply from here. China's growth has been built on an enormous domestic population, over 1.4 billion people, providing both a labor force and a consumer base large enough to sustain growth almost independent of the outside world if it ever needed to. Its government plans in decades, not years, through 5-year plans that set targets for industry, technology, and infrastructure, and then mobilize state resources to hit them, often ahead of schedule. This is a system built for scale and endurance, capable of building a city's worth of housing or a rail line spanning provinces in a fraction of the time it would take almost anywhere else on Earth. Dubai's model runs on the opposite principle. Its population is small, under 4 million people, and the overwhelming majority are foreign-born, expatriates and migrant workers who come for opportunity but hold no automatic path to citizenship, regardless of how long they live and work there. Dubai does not try to be self-sufficient. It thrives specifically because it is dependent on the rest of the world passing through it. Its airline, Emirates, connects more countries to each other through Dubai than almost any other hub on the planet, built on a simple insight that Dubai sits within an 8-hour flight of most of the world's population. Its ports move cargo between continents around the clock. Its free zones allow foreign companies full ownership with no local partner required, a level of openness that most nations, including China for most of its modern history, have historically restricted. Where China built to feed and employ its own people, Dubai built to become indispensable to everyone else's economy. Governance tells a similar story of contrast. China operates under a single-party system with long-term, top-down planning. Decisions can be made and executed at a scale that democratic or even monarchical systems often cannot match, mobilizing entire provinces toward a single infrastructure goal within a matter of years. But that same system carries real risk: overbuilding, debt-driven expansion, and in some cases, entire developments constructed and then left standing empty because supply outran real demand. Ghost cities, ambitious artificial island projects modeled loosely after Dubai's own Palm Islands, and heavily leveraged property developers have all become cautionary chapters in China's growth story. Reminders that speed without correction can produce beautiful structures with no one inside them. Dubai operates under a hereditary monarchy, but one that behaves less like a traditional royal court and more like a highly centralized corporate board. Sheikh Mohammed functions simultaneously as head of state and chief visionary, capable of approving a megaproject with a single directive and seeing it built within a handful of years rather than decades. This has produced extraordinary speed and consistency of vision, but it has also produced its own well-documented criticisms, most notably around the treatment of the migrant labor force that physically built the city's towers, often under difficult conditions, long hours, and with limited legal protection, and around an economy still vulnerable to global shocks, since so much of Dubai's wealth depends on tourism, trade, and real estate, rather than anything actually produced within its own borders. Neither model is without cost. China's rise lifted more people out of poverty faster than any nation in recorded history, but it came with environmental strain, deep regional inequality between coastal cities and inland provinces, and a level of state control that limits individual freedoms in ways many outside the system find difficult to accept. Dubai's rise created one of the most futuristic, safest, and most efficiently run cities on Earth, but it was built substantially on the labor of workers who will very likely never hold citizenship in the country they helped construct, and on an economy that requires constant reinvention to stay relevant now that the oil which funded its first decade of growth has all but run out. Consider what a resident's daily life actually looks like in each place. In Shenzhen, a young engineer might commute on a driverless subway car to a technology campus that did not exist a decade ago, working for a company competing directly with Silicon Valley in a city where the average age is under 35 and almost no one was born there, since nearly everyone arrived chasing opportunity, much like the migrant workers who built the first factories. In Dubai, a finance professional might commute along a coastal highway past man-made islands shaped like palm trees, working for an international firm that chose Dubai specifically because of its zero income tax, its stability in a historically unstable region, and its position as a meeting point between European, Asian, and African markets. Both cities are, in a very real sense, built almost entirely by outsiders for a vision that a small group of leaders decided the world needed, whether the world had asked for it or not.
Ambition in both places eventually stopped being about the ground beneath them and started reaching upward, quite literally, towards space. China built its own space station, landed rovers on the far side of the moon, and returned lunar samples to Earth, treating its space program as a direct extension of the same national confidence that built Shenzhen from nothing. The United Arab Emirates, with Dubai as its most visible face, launched the Hope probe to Mars, becoming the first Arab nation and only the fifth country in the world to successfully reach the Red Planet, a mission announced not by a space agency with decades of history, but by a government that 2 generations earlier had no universities, no satellites, and no aerospace industry at all. Neither achievement was strictly necessary for either economy to function. Both were built in part as statements, proof that a nation which came from nothing could compete for humanity's next frontier, not just its current one. Tourism tells its own version of this story. Dubai now welcomes more international visitors each year than cities many times its size and history, drawn by its beaches, its malls, its skiing inside the desert, and its willingness to build whatever attraction the next headline requires. China, despite decades of being viewed abroad primarily as a manufacturing base, has quietly become home to some of the most visited historical and natural sites on Earth, from the Great Wall to Zhangjiajie's floating mountains, alongside newly built attractions designed specifically to rival what Dubai has done with pure imagination. Both nations, in other words, have realized that the future is not only produced, it is also performed, packaged, and sold to the rest of the world as an experience worth witnessing in person. So which one actually built the better future? If the measure is scale, China wins without much argument. No nation in recorded history has industrialized, urbanized, and modernized this many people this quickly. It did not just build cities, it built the infrastructure of a new global superpower, from ports to rail to satellite systems to renewable energy production, and it now manufactures more of the world's goods than any other country on Earth, while simultaneously becoming a leading force in solar power, battery technology, and electric vehicles. If the measure is design and reinvention, Dubai wins with equal ease. It took a stretch of empty desert with almost no natural resources beyond a depleting oil reserve and turned it into one of the most visited, most photographed, and most aspirational cities on the planet, a place where over 200 nationalities live and work side by side, connected to nearly every corner of the globe through a single airport that now moves more international passengers than any other in the world. But if the measure is resilience, the answer becomes more complicated. China is now facing a slowing economy, a declining birth rate, and a mountain of local government debt built up during its fastest growth years, forcing a difficult transition from an economy built on construction and export toward one built on domestic consumption and technological independence. Dubai is racing just as urgently to diversify away from its remaining dependence on property and tourism, investing heavily in artificial intelligence, renewable energy, and financial services, appointing government ministers dedicated solely to future technologies to ensure it remains relevant for the next 50 years rather than resting on the successes of the last 50. Perhaps the honest answer is that neither city has actually finished building its future. China built a future defined by production, self-reliance, and sheer human scale, a model that other developing nations are now studying and in some cases attempting to replicate, from parts of Africa to Southeast Asia. Dubai built a future defined by connection, spectacle, and openness, a model that other Gulf states and increasingly ambitious cities across Africa and Asia are now studying just as closely, hoping to bottle even a fraction of what one small port managed to become. What both places prove, more than any single statistic ever could, is that the future is not something a nation simply inherits. It is something built, deliberately, out of whatever resources are available, even if those resources amount to nothing more than a fishing village or a stretch of empty sand, and a leader stubborn enough to believe it could become something else entirely. The real question this documentary leaves you with is not which of these two futures is objectively better. It is which one, if either, you would actually choose to live inside.